So let's now connect the frontend to the backend by sending a request to this change password API route. For this, we got this user profile component and there the profile form component, which is responsible for rendering this form. And it's here where I now want to handle the form submission, extract the entered values, and then send a HTTP request or send that extracted data to the parent component, so to the user profile component, and then there send the HTTP request, depending on where we want to do that. So let's start with handling form submission and getting the entered data. For this, we can add a new function here in the profile form component, the submit handler, or however you want to call it. There we get the event object, and we can call event prevent default to prevent the browser default of sending a request automatically, which we don't want. We want to control that with JavaScript and send our own request. And then we can point at this submit handler on the onSubmit prop on the form. That is step number 1. Now for extracting the entered values, we could use state and listen to changes on these inputs with every keystroke with the onChange event. Or we use refs to extract the values right when we need them, and I'll do that latter approach. I'll use that latter approach. Hence, I'll call useRef here, and of course import useRef from React to set up a reference and create a old password ref here, and then duplicate this to also create a new password ref. And now we need to connect these refs to the inputs. So here with the ref prop, we connect the new password field to the new password ref and the old password field to the old password ref. And now we can use these refs in the submit handler to get the entered values. So the entered old password can be extracted by using the old password ref, then .current, as we always do on refs, .value, and the same for the entered new password. Here we use the new password ref and get the value. Now we could add validation here, so we could check if the values are valid. So that is something we can do here. But just as before, I'll not do it here because we, in the end, don't proceed on the server side anyways if the input is wrong, and I want to focus on that authentication and server-side part here. So I will just assume that the entered inputs are correct, and with that assumption, we now can send the HTTP request or pass that data to a parent component, which then sends the HTTP request. It's up to you what you want to do. I will go for the parent component here, and therefore in the profile form component function, I'll accept this props argument, and then here call, let's say, a function which we get on the onChange password prop. The prop name is of course up to you since it's your component. And as a argument to this function, which I expect to get on this prop, I pass an object with the old password, which is set equal to the entered old password, and the new password, which I'll set equal to the entered new password. Now we just need to make sure that we set such a onChange password prop on the profile form component when we use it, and that is something we do in the user profile component. Here we use the profile form component, here we add the onChange password prop, and then point at a function which will be passed into the profile form through that prop. So here we can add the, let's say, change password handler function and pass this as a value into profile form. And here we get the password data. So this object with the old and new password, we get that here. And then in here, we can send this HTTP request. And we do this with the fetch function again. And the URL is /API/user to target this user folder in the API folder, /change-password to target this change password file. Now we need to configure this request with this second argument and, for example, change the request method. Here we expect to get a patch request, otherwise we don't continue. And hence, when we send this request, we need to set the method here to patch. Then we want to add a body, so data to that request in JSON format. And here I'll just forward my password data, which is this object with an old password and new password field. And you have to make sure that you have old password and new password written like this in this object, so that you use these property names, because it's old password and new password which I try to extract in my API route on that incoming body. So if you picked different names here in this object, which you create in the profile form component, then you need to extract these same names in the API route. Here I'm using equal names everywhere, and therefore this should work. Now last but not least, I'll add my headers here and set the content type to application JSON to make it clear that this request carries JSON data. Now that returns a promise, and to use async await, I'll turn this into an async function and await this and get my response here. And then here I will simply get my response data by awaiting response.json, and then I'll just log that data here. And of course, we typically want to give the user more feedback. Logging to the console is not something we want to do because the user won't see this, but this is only for us as a developer here to check whether it works. So now if we save all of that, this should work. And if we now go to this profile page and reload it, if I open the developer tools, we can test this now. For this, I'll enter a new password, and I'll start by entering an incorrect old password. If I now click on change password, I get a 403 error, which says invalid password, which makes sense because I entered an incorrect old password. Now I want to try the correct old password, but before I do that, let's go to MongoDB Atlas and find those documents here again to update this. And let's try to memorize this string. Of course, not the entire string, but we see that it starts with this strange part, has a dot, then lowercase ck, uppercase ap, ends with w8a. These are things we can memorize. And if everything works, now that I update the password with a correct old password, this string should change now because we override that existing password with a new hashed password. So if I now click change password with the correct old password, I get back password updated, which looks good. And if I now find documents again here, indeed, that is a new hashed password. And if I now log out here and I try to log in again with the old password, that should fail. And it looks like it does because I'm not redirected. If I would still be logging my data here, we should see that we have an error there, but I'm not logging it anymore. We're not handling this case that it fails, hence we get no feedback on the UI. But we clearly are not logged in because we're not redirected. But if I now try the correct new password and I click login, now I am redirected, so now logging in did work. And I can then navigate around as I did before, reload this page, and that all works. And that's now how we can also work with our protected API route, which also requires authentication, but which now checks authentication on the server side instead of on the client side or for the client side pages as we did it before.